Hey, this is Tom, and welcome to part 3 of 2010 Tom Sculpting Archives. This was a big year, and this last part of this Sculpting Archives really showcases a lot of work that I did. I knocked out another Merc squad, full Merc squad, and I finished the Havoc Protocol Specialists, which were some of my favorite miniatures for a long time. And it was really the first time that I dove into really creating my own concepts and starting to blend that together. So sit back and enjoy part 3 of 2010. Going through these sculpting archives always brings up lots of memories of how I went about learning techniques and the things that I figured out and started to teach to others over the years. And if you would like to learn more and up your miniature sculpting game, click the link down in the description below and get my ultimate quick start guide to sculpting miniatures. One of the reasons that 2010 ended up being a larger year for number of sculpts I did was it was the year after I sold out of my portion of Mercs. So rather than having the weight of trying to decide, am I going to take a sculpting commission or am I going to work on something that I'm not sure how well it will sell, it was able to convert over to my passion for working on this awesome sci-fi line with Keith still, but knowing that I was going to get an actual immediate paycheck. I remember going nuts when I saw the concepts for this group from Keith. I was very much in a mode where I wanted to really up my game and just pack in lots of details and interesting shapes and still do outstanding and dynamic poses. And this figure was another chance to really push the envelope in some of those spaces while not making a figure that was brutally difficult to assemble. For this one, the only kind of tricky piece was it does have an ammo belt, but man, I love how that thing just swings around from the ammo pack up into the gun. The FCC Liaison was a special character for the group. It had a lot of interesting equipment, but he was supposed to be more subtle, so he's kind of hunched down, coordinating things, communicating, and it was a neat challenge to whenever I had to do a figure that wasn't more upright, to help make them interesting and stand out while still not looking too diminutive in stature. I also, this was a time where our mold maker had got these much better rubbers and they could start to mold almost anything. So I was very happy to be able to use plasticard and some other little bits like that would make it easier to sculpt hard edge pieces without having to pre-sculpt it with putty. And special kudos goes to the mold makers because this figure was actually very hard to mold. We were keeping it very minimally pieced. I don't remember if both arms, I think maybe the pistol arm was separate, but the other one was left in place initially. It might have all been one piece actually. I really had it in my head that it was all one piece except for the backpack, and they were able to mold this. It was very tricky. There was a special flap that you had to flip up, and so the mold would wear down faster, and it was just took more time to actually make this figure. In the end, we ultimately went back after some time, and I converted this figure so that it would have multiple parts for its arms, and that then allowed us to mold the body in one piece and have separate pieces without any super mold maker kung fu going on. The FCC Boomer was really fun to do. Not only did he have a more casual weapon hold, he had a lot of interesting bits that were different than what I was typically sculpting. He's got the cybernetic prosthetic, he has a full face mask. I love doing the bandolier on this figure, and he's rather simple, but he's got a really good presence to him. I sort of touched on this on the last figure, but you'll notice on the cybernetic that, and even the bandolier, that I was starting to use other parts such as brass rods to just save a little bit of time. and not waste it trying to perfectly sculpt something separate that I would tack on, or sculpting it loosely on the figure and having it not be as tight and refined. Man, those backpacks were a lot of fun. There was just so much going on with them. It was a real interesting exercise to make the backpacks for all the different characters. Juron was my 101st figure, and I don't think I realized it at the time, but when I got this commission for DGS, I decided to just try different things and really push myself. The concept was a lot of fun. I was excited to work on something with so much flowing robes. So on this figure, you can see that I went away from where I've really started to settle in with mainly Procreate, and I went back and I did a lot of Procreate on this figure. But for all of the flowing robes, this is where I was really starting to get into playing with the green stuff and Kneadatite mix. It gave me it made it feel a little more like clay, but without actually, working in clay, and gave me more control over the folds, plus the ability to shave and scrape just to start crisping up edges. When I was sculpting this figure, I was referencing a lot of the work that you see in Dark Sword, just where everything is so clean and so fully realized and more technical. I was moving in that direction, but there was still some whimsy and maybe a little less refinement that I thought I could do. So this one, I was really focusing on executing that. A big part of this commission, a big important piece to the client, was to get the face right. They really wanted a good, strong face. They specifically asked me actually to sculpt him to look like Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn, and so I had some reference for that, and I think I did a very good job there. This is also, I'm trying to remember, this might be the first or definitely one of the most successful early on where I sculpted the figure with an open hand. And early on when I would try this, it always looked like a big mitten or catcher's mitt, and I really think I did a great job of nailing that down to a accurate looking proportion with some dynamic movement. While this might not be the most dynamic miniature I've ever sculpted, there's still a lot of great movement, especially in the clothes, and it will always remain one of the favorite sculpts I've ever done because of the technical ability and the way I really pushed myself. After taking that detour away from Mercs, I'm back on the FCC Assault Trooper, and you can also see that I am back to my kind of standard operating procedures with sculpting, focusing on Procreate, using green stuff, but only for small little bits, details, things where I needed it to stick a little easier and I wasn't going to have to work with it for an excessive amount of time. There was definitely a level of wanting to work that way for comfort and familiarity, but I also, whenever I would do a series of sculpts like this, I always wanted to keep a consistency throughout all of the figures. You'll also notice that there's some modularity going on with this figure, but I am going to touch on that when I speak about the next one. The final sculpt for the FCC House 9 group was actually a mod pack for the Assault Trooper. So this was a bit mix of conversion / new sculpting, but the idea with these guys was to help give them a lot of variety. Whenever you're sculpting soldiers, they have a tendency to look very similar, and this group specifically looked a little bit more traditional than a lot of the other Mercs groups. So when I was sculpting the Assault Trooper, it was known that these extra bits would be coming into play. For the pack, it came with a separate set of legs, a few different guns for the torso to hold, and different backpacks as well as different heads. And when you put them all together, you could get quite a lot of variety. They all used the same torso, so they were holding their weapon in pretty much the same position, but you could twist and pivot the torso, which helped give more dynamic and choice to help everyone's teams not look quite the same. I'm really proud of how this turned out. When I was doing these multi-part reusable type of figures in the past, especially for Rusted Heroes, it was fairly successful, some better than others, but this figure, I feel like any configuration you can put together, you can't tell that there were all these different sculpted parts put together at various times. It's no matter what you do, it creates a really nice cohesive figure. The Cat Limited Edition CCC Incinerator was the last Merc sculpt that I did for 2010. And this figure is really special to me because it was the first time trying a refresh of an existing figure or character and dabbling in the world of marketing. When the CCC Incinerator was first envisioned, created, it was just another Mercs character in a full suit. We weren't really thinking about if it was a man or a woman, it was just a powered armor character. Well, as the game started to take shape, the author Brian Schotten had this idea that it would actually be a woman in there, very much similar to Samus, where you assume it's a guy because it's always a guy, but we were going to turn it on its head. So I pitched this idea of doing a special limited edition figure that we could give out at cons or use for whatever, but a chance to do something a little different. At the time, Infinity was doing this a lot with their figures. They just had these special giveaway characters, and this seemed like a really fun way to make a character that you could use in the game, but it was really more of a showcase piece for you as a collector of Mercs. The other reason I was excited to do this figure is I knew I was going to be able to reuse most, if not all, of the original sculpt. So I wasn't going to have to sculpt all the technical widgets and baubles all over again and worry about matching them up perfectly. When I was converting this figure, I actually ended up making a full real armature for the new cat miniature. However, instead of sculpting every single piece again, if I had a part that I could use, I simply drilled holes and pinned those parts into the armature. So the character would have the correct proportions and things like that, but I still had good, solid, workable understructure to build on all of the new parts as well. We never had a chance to make any other of these promotional figures, but I always wanted to, and it's something that I think about doing for my own line, Effigy Miniatures. And the grand finale for 2010 is the SciFi Hacker. This is the last miniature that I sculpted for what would become Effigy. I should say it's the last sci-fi miniature because I believe there's still a fantasy one yet to come. It's actually funny to think about how much I focused on fantasy, and that's really what I'm become known for in recent years, because at this time it was all sci-fi all the time. I was doing fantasy, but I was sculpting so much for Mercs, and I really had a trajectory in mind to make my own sci-fi line as well, starting with these figures. I was really settling in with designing my own concepts and sculpting the miniatures from those. I was also focused on creating figures that still had dynamic movement. Even if it wasn't wild, there would just be movement, but without having to do a lot of multiple parts. It was very expensive to do multiple parts, and frankly, I was getting a little sick of having to fiddle with it all the time. It was nice just to sculpt a figure and let it be what it would be. This figure has some other special significance as well, as it was the first time that I recorded myself sculpting a figure. I had already started sculpting the figure, so the armature was done in pose and there was a little bit of build-up before I just realized that I would want to record it. But aside from that, you can see the entire figure being sculpted to completion. And those videos are how I launched my YouTube channel. It was, I think in 2011 is when I finally posted them as a lead up to help promote the Kickstarter for these figures and just get the word out there. Little did I know that it would lead to all of this and all of you learning and growing as sculptors. So thank you so much. And if you haven't seen that video series, make sure you click this link and check it out, especially for the rockin' music. Thanks for coming with me as we go through another Tom's Sculpting Archives. Hey, that's me. There's many more to come. Until next time, keep sculpting.